Hello, I'm John Siegenthaler. In 1957, the Reverend James Lawson brought the principles of nonviolent protest to Nashville and brought this city to the forefront of the civil rights movement. The contributions of Reverend Lawson and the Nashville movement have long gone underappreciated. His is the story of the struggle for racial equality in America, and Nashville played an important role in that nonviolent revolution. In the fall of 2006, my friend Jim Lawson sat down and told the story of the Nashville civil rights movement. Now, here is that story in his own words. Please enjoy a conversation with James Lawson.
Oh, this little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Oh, this little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Oh, this little light of mine.
Well, the first 7-8 months or so, I traveled in and out of Nashville. As this Fellowship of Reconciliation's secretary, I was kind of a troubleshooter because there were crises all over the place: Memphis, Jackson, Mississippi, Little Rock, Arkansas. So I got to meet all of the Little Rock Nine, Charlottesville, Virginia, Columbia, South Carolina. So I extensively traveled for the most part, doing workshops, maybe in Nashville, primarily perhaps on the weekends, 2 or 3 days during the week and then away on the weekends. So that was my life at that time. It did mean that I got reacquainted with Martin King, better acquainted, and became a part of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, which was the organization he founded. And what I found in Nashville was a local chapter of the Nashville Christian Leadership Council, because Kelly Miller Smith had been one of the founders of the larger Southern region group, and that then had returned to Nashville and organized one. So I was invited by Kelly to be a part of the executive board and to be chair for action of that organization. Kelly Miller Smith at that time was pastor of First Baptist Church, Capitol Hill, and probably was the major pastor of the city, who in a way was not only the pastor of a congregation, but in which the whole city of Nashville was his parish and his concern. So he was deeply involved in a great variety of ways. He at one time was president of the NAACP. He was at one time president of the Interdenominational Ministerial Fellowship. He was at one time president of the Nashville Human Relations Council Committee. He was a professor at American Baptist Theological School at the time. So he was a person whose ministry was deeply engaged in across the city. And a young man, the age probably of maybe a few years older than Martin King, maybe in his mid-30s or late 30s at that time. But an extremely personable, handsome, acutely intelligent, and moral man in the best sense of the church. We did workshops for the Nashville Christian Leadership Conference on nonviolence, and Glenn Smiley came to help do that with me. So those were week-long workshops in '58, assessing the scene. Then, as a member of NCLC, our executive board decided that we wanted to move in some dynamic way to make change using nonviolence. And so in the winter of '59, we did a series of workshops on assessing the situation in Nashville. And that was for the purpose of asking ourselves the question, what are the issues that Negroes in Nashville face? What are the issues of segregation and the rest of it? So we did that every Saturday. I do not remember how many Saturdays. But in the process of doing that, we then decided, we followed that up with a series of meetings in which we asked ourselves the question, what's the next step? What's the next step for Nashville? What's the next step for nonviolent struggle? Because that was our interest. And it was out of that the decision was made that we will desegregate downtown Nashville. In our talk, we listed, you know, all the different issues. This was an exhaustive list of issues, education, so forth and so on. But then in the spring, as we were assessing where do we begin, some of these were prioritized, and we made a list, as I recall. But the women in those workshops were the most persuasive because they described the problem of shopping in downtown Nashville. They also indicated to us that, quote, you men do not do the shopping. We do it. And this was person after person who did this and impacted me personally a good bit with their arguments. They described the segregation, the white-colored signs. Oftentimes, signs for restrooms which read, white gentlemen, white ladies, then colored, which in 1958 was a no-no. It was against most people's sensibilities. They described how they couldn't try on a hat that they liked, that they saw in a window oftentimes, could not try it on. As the proposal surfaced, therefore, let us desegregate downtown Nashville. That was the one that increasingly became very powerful to me, and the group reached a consensus on it. This was somewhere between 30 and 45 or 50 people on different weekends, different Saturdays. But there was a strong consensus. So I want to emphasize that. Desegregate downtown Nashville. So the notion was not primarily a sit-in. The notion was get those signs down, open up waiting rooms for people to be able to sit in and whatnot and whatnot. And there was no restaurant in downtown Nashville where a Negro could stop and have a sandwich. They got hungry and they decided to go into a Neisner for a hot dog. They had to take that hot dog outside and eat it on the street. And while some people would do that, many of the rest of us would not do it. That's the reality. So that's how that decision emerged. And I want to give a holistic picture that while the sit-in became the popularly understood demonstration, it was only one technique that, from our point of view, would help begin the process of desegregating Nashville. When we started the project to desegregate downtown Nashville, we then scheduled workshops to begin in September of 1959, every week, to which we began to recruit people. And we recruited students and clergy and lay people, including women, from the very beginning. So those September workshops had perhaps anywhere between 20 and 30 people in it. As the word got out, they might have increased with larger numbers of students, but from the very beginning of the workshop, we did have Diane Nash, who I had helped to recruit, Paul LaPrade, Jim Bevel, Angeline Butler, John Lewis was in from the very first week. Kelly Miller Smith had recruited John Lewis as an example. So several of us did recruitment of church members and students and clergy. So we had a good core group of people in September. The workshops basically took a biblical perspective, because knowing that most of these people were members of churches and baptized and Christians, I rooted nonviolence in biblical thought and Christian theology, and in Jesus. Because by that time, my reading and study of the Bible, I was absolutely persuaded of the nonviolent perspective that could be found there. When we talk about the grace of God, well, the grace of God is a nonviolent grace of God. It is not a wrath. It is not beating up on people. It is loving people fully beyond their weaknesses, failures, mistakes, sins, and the rest of it.
Oh Lord, I'm running for freedom.
The Nashville movement did have major impact. It produced for the next decade many of the field people, many of the staff people for Southern Christian Leadership Conference, for SNCC, for CORE, the Mississippi Summer campaigns in Birmingham, St. Augustine, Florida, Albany, Georgia, and Danville, Virginia, right across the movement. People who came out of Nashville and were part of those struggles. The second thing that the impact of Nashville occurred was that in 1961, when the Freedom Ride began, just 16 people planning to go on the buses, try in the waiting rooms until they reached New Orleans. The bus was burned in Anniston, Alabama. And then in Birmingham, the bus was met with a mob and a lot of people beaten up. There were just 16 riders at that time. The 16 were so demoralized and injured, they decided that they would not go on to Montgomery, and that they would simply catch planes to New Orleans and complete the exercise of that campaign. Well, we in Nashville had a different mind. We felt, because of our nonviolent, our steeping in nonviolence, we felt that we could not permit violence to stop a legitimate, peaceful operation, even in Birmingham. And there was a struggle in the Central Committee to talk about this, and the decision was made that Nashville would pick it up. Diane, who was then working as our subsistence organizer, coordinator, was asked to call Robert Kennedy, to call Martin King, and say that the Nashville movement's going to pick this up, and we will have people in Birmingham who will take the bus to Montgomery, and we will have people in Montgomery who will take the bus to Jackson, Mississippi. The group that arrived and took the bus from Birmingham to Montgomery was also brutalized by a mob. The police were nowhere near, and I think that may be the occasion when John Siegenthaler, who had been sent by Robert Kennedy, the Attorney General, as an observer, may have been knocked unconscious. Well, that revitalized that nonviolent demonstration. And 300 or 400 people eventually rode the bus from Montgomery to Jackson, Mississippi, from Little Rock to Jackson, from New Orleans to Jackson. People came from around the country, so that eventually several hundred of us, 300-400 of us, were arrested and spent time in the jails of Mississippi. I reached Nashville in time to drive to Montgomery to take the bus from Montgomery to Jackson. So my group of about 13 was the first group arrested in Jackson, Mississippi. So that put it back on the front pages of the world and made it essentially a nationwide campaign that affected the movement and allowed the movement, in fact, then to go year after year with campaigns. If that event had failed in Birmingham, it would have been a very critical loss to the development of a movement and to the energy of SCLC and SNCC, which had just begun, and CORE. So as a consequence of that picking up steam and energy and our not allowing the burning buses to interrupt a legitimate, peaceful demonstration, we gave the movement new life. A third thing about Nashville was that the desegregation process began in Nashville in terms of downtown areas. May 10th is the day that the restaurants that we had targeted and those that had cooperated desegregated. The white-colored restrooms disappeared. The white-colored drinking fountains disappeared. All of that began to disappear. Actually, it started in Nashville before May 10th because with the energy of young men and women in this campaign, they were not contented with demonstrating only when we had a Wednesday or Saturday demonstration. And so the Central Committee and I would get personal calls from different people saying, the Greyhound bus station has 2 waiting rooms. Should we organize a group and start there? And I would say, fine. Remember all the things we've tried to do. So, and then a call on Trailways, and then a call on the Union train station. Those places actually pulled the white-colored signs down before May 10th. They were 3 successes that really raised the enthusiasm and the level of the Central Committee and a variety of students who participated in them.
If you will find
So when Alexander Luby's house was bombed on April the 19th, 1960, we were having a Central Committee meeting at 6 o'clock that morning anyway. But when that bombing took place, and we learned that what it was, we agreed very quickly we're going to have a silent march that would begin at Tennessee State and march down Jefferson to City Hall. We would send telegrams to the mayor and ask him to meet us there. And we selected C.T. Vivian and Diane Nash to be our 2 spokespeople. It was very successful. It was the largest such march that had taken place in the movement up to that time. By the time we reached downtown Hall, we'd probably been joined by 4,000 to 5,000 people, and it was beautifully executed. Our Central Committee fanned out. We made assignments. One group rushed immediately to Tennessee State, another group to Fisk. We tried very quickly to get out instructions that it would be a silent march to City Hall. And it was rather spectacular. So that's another good point about Nashville. That was the first such sizable march in the movement up to that time. And it took place in Nashville. We marched 3 and 4 to a rank, highly disciplined, and it stretched, down Jefferson Street to the City Hall. And then there, Mayor West did meet us. West did consider himself a moderate. He did not consider himself, he definitely did not count himself morally and practically a segregationist, ideologically or otherwise. And that he had the courage to say that on that particular day was rather phenomenal. Up to that time, I don't suppose there had been any political figure in the Southeast who had boldly said such a thing as, yes, I think the counters should be desegregated. Yes, I don't think it's right that you can, because that was Diane's first question. I do not think it's right that you can go and buy a hat in a store, but you can't sit in the counter and have a cup of coffee. As, you know, whatever how he said it, but he did say, I don't think that's right. Well, that's really the first time there was any major voice. Well, I mean, I should say, the mayor of the city is the leading elected official of the city, and that he had the guts to stand up and say that then and there when he had been very ambiguous about it, about stuff. He never allowed himself to get on those sides, except he did seem to back the police in arresting folk and allowing some mob action to take place. But he nevertheless had the character to say that. I think that's quite important.
These young people are about their father's business, and they are carving a tunnel of hope through the great mountain of despair.
I think one of the legacies of the Nashville movement would be the fact that King called the movement the model movement up to that time. And SCLC and Martin King used that imagery in future efforts, in campaign after campaign. So that would have been one impact. The people who got involved in SCLC and SNCC would be a second impact, because some of us became advanced staff people for places like Birmingham, Selma, Alabama, and elsewhere. That was a second impact. We became folk who worked directly with King and with the SCLC movements, with citizenship schools, with workshops on nonviolence and the training of field workers, which I did annually for SCLC throughout that decade. So that was another impact, indeed. The whole notion that nonviolence can be strategic and disciplined is, I think, a contribution from us, from Nashville, very well, and because, not only because of the movement itself that was here, but also because those of us who went out to teach, or in my own case, continued teaching it, made that a central part of the teaching, that nonviolent action should be highly disciplined, highly trained. People should do the strategizing, the planning. They should work systematically in developing a plan of change and the actions that would help to accelerate the change.
Don't you know Mississippi is the next to go? Keep your eyes